One of the joys of the internet is being able to find and connect with people from your past. So you can imagine my delight when I heard from Trevor, a guy I went to grade school with. Trevor is a widower who pads out his pension by working as a security guard. And one of the sites he looks after is our old grade school, now slated for demolition. Believe it or not, they plan to build new houses on that lot, a new subdivision, Trevor told me in a recent email. My job was just to check the exterior, to make sure there were no squatters, no break-ins. But I did have a key to the place, and well, I couldn't resist taking a peek inside. Big mistake. Big mistake. From Trev's email. It felt a little strange and a little creepy to walk those halls again after, 50 years? Everything was so small. I mean, I practically had to get down on my knees to use the drinking fountain. So I took a spin down memory lane and visited some of our old classrooms, and the staff room, and the principal's office. I even found the strap and gave one of my hands a lick. Ouch! And both the boys' and the girls' washrooms. The girls' washroom. Woo-hoo! And, of course, the gym/auditorium. The auditorium seemed pretty tiny, too. I went backstage and remembered about all the times we'd sit back there telling ghost stories by the light from a flashlight. I found a basketball and yeah, I had to take a shot. Swished a few through the net, too. Swished a few. I was just leaving the auditorium when I heard a most prosaic sound, but a sound that was totally shocking and totally out of place in the current situation and in the dark. It was the flushing of a toilet. What the? I already visited both washrooms, and obviously there was no one there. It came to me that there might be something wrong with one of the commodes that made it flush by itself. But whatever the cause, I had to check it out. It had come from the boys' washroom. At least I thought it had. And so I went in, although I admit hesitating at the door for just a second. But then I pulled myself together and went in. As you know, the boys had 3 stalls with high wooden walls, and I checked all 3. Nothing. Of course there was no one there. Just total silence, with nary a drip to be heard. I stepped back into the hallway, feeling sheepish. Behind me, a toilet flushed. I was back in there in a flash, and with my flash, checked all the stalls. Again, nothing. I headed back out into the darkened hallway, determined to get out of there before something else happened. I admit, I was getting spooked. And in the auditorium, someone started dribbling a basketball. I ran to the auditorium, unlocked the doors, shone my light, and saw the basketball sitting just where I'd left it. I turned off my light, then slowly closed and locked the auditorium door and heard someone dribbling a basketball. It was time to leave. I headed down the west wing. Earlier, I thought how short it was, but now it seemed incredibly long. And as I did, the now continuous dribbling was joined by another sound, the return of the flushing toilets. Toilets! All the cans in both washrooms, boys and girls, were flushed over and over and over again, as if someone or something was trying to flood the joint. I wasn't running yet. In fact, I didn't start running until the locker doors started to slam. You know how they had lockers lining the hall on both sides of the west wing? Well, as I headed for the exit, they began opening and slamming shut, at first behind me, then next to me, then in front of me. Bang, 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 bang! I had almost reached the exit in safety when I felt compelled to turn around, and that's when I saw it. A ghostly figure in white was floating down the hall towards me, and as I stared in shock, I realized that its head and body were made of wads of toilet paper, some of which streamed out behind it. It looked like a mummy wrapped up in off-white bandages, with a toilet tissue face that was crushed and caved in, with a sucking expression that radiated. What? Hunger? It was almost upon me, so I slammed out the exit and out into the night. Of course, I neglected to lock the door, so I had to go back, which I did the next day, in broad daylight. The hallway was dead quiet, a silence which to my imagination had a hush of expectancy. A lot of toilet paper lay on the floor just inside the door. I thought about picking it up, but something told me not to. As I locked the door, I heard it, off in the darkness, the flushing of a toilet. I will never go in there again. Trev. The moral of the story? Being pursued by a toilet paper ghost would be a real bummer. The stall. I woke up to find myself sitting on the toilet in a washroom stall. Just to clarify, I was fully dressed, not with my pants around my ankles, and I was seated on the lid, not on the seat. The seat, you know, the part with the hole in it. I wasn't sure why I was there, or how I had got there. In fact, I didn't really know exactly where I was, and I couldn't even remember my own name. My name. I realized I had to get out of there, get help, so I stood up and went to open the stall door and stopped dead, suddenly terrified. What if there was something out there? Something that wanted to hurt me? Maybe I should wait a bit. I tried to remember who I was and where I was and how I had wound up there. Tried, but I couldn't remember a thing. It was all so misty, insubstantial, and vague. Was this all just a nightmare? Was I having a nightmare? Would I wake up soon? I thought about calling out, "Hello? Hello? Is there anyone there?" But once again I was stopped by the idea that someone might be lurking. Someone or something that might want to hurt me. I decided to wait a bit more to see if I could hear anything. Toilet flushed. It seemed to be off to my right. Was there another person, another man in here with me? I listened hard, but I was unable to detect any human sounds, the sounds of anyone moving around. You know, fumbling with the toilet paper dispenser, standing up, fumbling with the door, breathing. I couldn't hear the sound of breathing or of shoes scuffling on the tile floor. Was there someone else in here? I waited to see if I could hear the sound of movement. But nothing. In the end, I had no choice but to get down on my hands and knees and stare under the partition to see if I could see feet or a pair of shoes. At least the tile floor looked reasonably clean. I stared under the gap. Nothing. The room was suddenly filled with a tsunami of sound, and my heart skipped a beat. But it was only water flushing through the urinals. I was straightening up off the floor when I saw the graffiti. It had been etched into the dark brown paint with a pointed object, a pen, keys, or a knife. It said, "My name is Dan Haller. I go to MISCU. I was in my 10 a.m. poli-sci class, and then suddenly I'm here. I frightened. There are things here bad." That was all it said. But that was enough. I sat back down stunned, trying to dissipate my mental fog. Who was I, and how did I get here? Was I a student too? Had I been in class before I got here? Remember, man. Try to remember. I think this place might be a washroom in a university, but I didn't know, and I couldn't remember. I sat there, lost in thought and in terror, for I don't know how long. It might have been 5 minutes, it might have been an hour. But in the end, I steeled myself to the fact I would have to leave the stall. After listening intently for another minute, I got up, slipped back the bolt, and opened the door to the stall. I took a quick look around, but the washroom was obviously empty. It was an ordinary-looking washroom with white walls, a tile floor, and a row of stalls, all painted an excremental brown. The only thing really unusual about it was that it was really clean, like it had hardly ever been used. There were none of the usual bathroom smells, but still, there was that graffiti. I caught sight of myself in the row of mirrors and stared. So that was me, eh? I can't say I recognized myself. This dude with long black hair, a lantern jaw, wearing jeans and a blue turtleneck. But then my mind was in a complete fog. I tiptoed across the room, moving as quietly as a mouse, and actually holding my breath. At the door, I stopped to listen, my ear against the cold metal. But I could hear nothing, no sound from beyond. Behind me, a toilet flushed, and I almost jumped out of my skin, barely suppressing a scream. I slowly pushed open the door, which creaked like something out of a horror movie. When I had it fully opened, I stopped to listen again, but there was no sound, nothing. The hall outside the washroom was just an ordinary hallway, with pissy yellow walls and gray institutional carpeting, all lit up by bands of overhead fluorescent lights. I was glad for the carpeting, as it would deaden my footfalls. But why was I trying to be so quiet? Just what was I frightened of? Once again I caught myself listening. And this time I did hear something, the sound of movement, coming from around a corner, just ahead of me. Once again I was terrified, frightened to my very core, convinced that the thing, for it was a thing, I was certain, that the thing around the corner meant to harm me. I quickly slipped back into the washroom, quietly shutting the door and hurrying to my old stall, my stall, where I crouched atop the toilet lid to keep my feet off the floor, to keep them from being visible. I waited. The door crashed open with a bang, and my heart was in my mouth. For several seconds, nothing happened. And then I heard it, not footsteps, but the sound of movement in the room. And then something like a fist slammed the door of the first stall, hard, as if they were trying to dent it or break it down. And then the invisible hand struck the door of the next stall, then the next one, the one next to mine, and then mine, and then all of them, over and over and over again, and faster and faster and faster, in a bone-jarring cacophony of pounding. I screamed at the top of my lungs. This was the end. It must be. And I felt a sudden desire to tell someone, anyone, what had happened to me. So I went to scratch a message in the paint with my fingernails, when I suddenly remembered. My name is Dan Haller, and I go to Miscue. I was in my 10 a.m. poli-sci class, and then suddenly I was here in this washroom where there are things that want to hurt me. I felt a sudden urge to look up. Was something looking down at me over the top of the stall? Some hideous face? To my amazement, the roof of the washroom seemed to vanish in a blaze of light, which left me momentarily blinded. Squinting, I was shocked to see a huge face, a huge human face covered with a surgical mask, gazing down at me like I was a rat in a maze or some kind of lab animal. My eyes were blinded again by a bright and shiny object, which I saw to my horror was a humongous pair of tweezers. Tweezers! Being directed towards me. I had an accident in my pants then. My last hysterical thought was, "Oh God, God, no, I'm plucked." The moral of the story? In life, you sometimes have to decide whether to sit, or get off the pot. A paradox. Life was stricter in the 1970s, but people, especially young people, had more freedom. Don't believe it? Well, consider the tween-age phenomena of camping out in the backyard. Would today's helicopter parents expose their precious angels to the dangers of being kidnapped or falling victim to a serial killer? Probably not. But we had no problem sleeping out circa 1972. Maybe our folks were hoping we'd be kidnapped. I never asked. I guess I didn't really want to know. But one hot summer night in 72, we were lying on our sleeping bags inside the stifling interior of a tent in Rap's backyard. It was the usual crew, and we were too bored or lazy to move. Too lazy to go to the 24-hour ranch supermarket for chips or old port Colts, rum-flavored, wine-tipped. Too lazy to go to Tim Hortons. We exhausted all the jokes we knew, both clean and obscene, and were reduced to such grade 2 classics as, "What did the floor say to the wall? Meet you at the corner." We'd also run through all the ghost stories and urban legends. The Hook, Don't Look Back, Bloody Mary, Humans Can Lick Too, The Spiders in the Hairdo. They all got a yawn. We'd all heard them a million times before. "I think the school library is haunted," I said. I didn't have any proof it was haunted, but the classroom always gave off a weird and dismal feeling any time I was alone in it, especially on cloudy afternoons with the overhead lights turned off. I always felt like someone or something was watching me. Of course, there were rumors about kids who died at school or off themselves because of the mean teachers, but no one ever had any particulars, as in the kid's name and what really happened to them. So it was just a feeling, but I sometimes did wonder, could it be haunted? My comment fell on deaf ears. Nobody cared if it was haunted or not. But someone was listening, because Rap said, "Let's sneak into the school." Shemp snorted, not loudly. "How could we do that?" Turns out it was easy, back then. Back in the 70s, there was no CCTV, and few places had security systems. So all you had to do to enter a building like the school was to climb through an open window. In this case, it was the window of the supply room, which, according to Rap, was always left open about an inch above the bottom of the window frame. So we simply raised it, and voila, we were inside. I was the one who said the school library was haunted. But haunted or not, it was creepy to be inside a deserted building at night, in the dark. Our footsteps echoed in the empty hallways, even though we tried to be quiet. At least, most of us. "Hey, where's all the ghosties?" Rick bellowed, his deafening voice releasing a cacophony of echoes. The echoes eventually died down, but then the silence was broken by a loud crash. "What the?" we all said at once, and I answered the question with, "I think it came from the library." "You and your haunted library," Rick snorted. At this point, I was in favor of heading back to the tent, but Rap said, "Let's check it out." As I said, I always found the library a weird and dismal place in daytime, But it was appalling in the semi-darkness. And on the floor we found a stack of books, which had evidently fallen off a nearby shelf. "That's what made the noise," Shemp said. "Yeah," I replied. "But why did they fall off?" We were interrupted by Rap turning on Rick and stammering, What did you hit me for?" "I didn't hit you." "Well, then who did?" "Oh, you'd know if I hit you." And then something pinched my ear. But there was no one close to me who could have done it. I realized in an instant what was happening. It's a ghost. A poltergeist, I think." "Oh, a ghosty," Rick said with disgust. "Oh, who's shit?" Rap wanted to know. For just then the room was filled with the most appalling stench I've ever been forced to breathe. It was so bad, it made me glad supper had been hours earlier. Otherwise, barf. But before we could accuse each other of being the stinker, the foul odor was replaced by a bone-rattling chill, a deep freeze which left us chattering and shaking like we were having fits. Without a word, we all made for the open doorway. And the damn door slammed shut. Rick tore at it frantically, and even though Rap was swearing at him to pull the effing thing open, the big guy cried, "I can't budge it." I heard Shemp gasp behind me, and I whirled around to see the room was possessed. Books flew off the shelves, danced through the air, while the big oak table by the window began spinning, and the chairs capered about like they were dancing. The globe on the librarian's desk was spinning, like it was planning to take off. Shemp instinctively reached out to grab one of the chairs, only to be violently thrown aside, crashing into Rap and slamming him against the wall. The door suddenly flew open and we flew out. The door then slammed shut behind us, opened, and slammed shut again. And then all was silent. I think we all breathed a sigh of relief. Silence, blessed silence, until we heard someone shout, "Hey!" We froze, figuring we were busted, and given what was happening, we were almost happy to be caught. We waited for the cop or janitor or teacher or whatever to come and collar us, but nothing happened. I thought I heard Rap began to say, but Rick interrupted with, "What the hell is that?" In the gathering gloom, at the far end of the hall, we could make out a white spherical object which appeared to be floating, and as we watched, it suddenly became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as it came flying towards us, mouth agape, shrieking like a banshee. I don't know how we got out of there. I dimly remember climbing the fence, and then we were back in the tent, gasping for breath, not even worrying about waking up the old folks. It was about 20 minutes before anyone spoke. Then Rap whispered, still short of air, "That must have been a floater." "Hey, what about that stuff in the library?" I managed to say. We just scared ourselves. Like a bunch of little kids," Rick choked out. "What about the books?" I said. They fell down." "The awful smell?" Somebody farted." I gave up. We just lay there, waiting for our heart rates to go down. Then Shemp said, "Let's not go back." Nobody argued for once. We just lay there, falling asleep, Rick murmuring, "Bet we imagined the whole thing." And that's when we heard it. a low, ominous chuckle right outside the tent. Something slapped the canvas wall next to where I lay. It could have been a hand or a disembodied human head throwing itself against the tent. And then we heard a mocking voice say, ever so softly, "Good night, boys. Pleasant dreams." We stayed put for the rest of the night, but we didn't sleep or even close our eyes. I've always been a light sleeper, ready to wake up the instant anything goes bump in the night. It's like I sleep with one eye open. Let me give you an example. If I tell myself to wake up at 7 a.m., I wake up at 7 a.m. on the dot. Works every time, like a charm. I've never needed an alarm clock. So, the slightest noise, and I'm wide awake, which is why I saw the faceless man standing outside my bedroom. My bed faces the door, which I keep open at night, and there is a blue nightlight in the hallway beyond. I must have heard his tread on the carpet. I opened my eyes to see him silhouetted in the doorway, a tall figure in black, wearing a hat like a fedora. I couldn't see any eyes. In fact, I couldn't discern a face. It was just a blank, white blur. I stared at the figure, too astonished to be afraid, and after a few minutes, he faded away, only to return the following evening. This time, the figure was closer, in the room. Again, I stared at him, and he faded away. I went back to sleep. I hoped that would be the last I would see of this figure. But the next night, I awoke to find the figure had returned and had its hands on my throat. I couldn't breathe. It was throttling me. The figure was kneeling on my chest, further cutting my airflow. It was incredibly strong, and I found I couldn't move. And then it hit me. I was suffering an episode of sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis. All I had to do was stay calm, and eventually the figure would fade away, and I would be free again. So I relaxed. At least I tried to. It was hard to do, feeling suffocated. But eventually, I went back to sleep. I woke up to find the room crowded with people. "Looks like he went into cardiac arrest," someone said. "Look at his face," another voice said. "Something frightened him to death." I went to open my eyes, only to realize they were already open. 3 people were crowded into my bedroom. 2 emergency medical technicians and a police officer. Of course, we won't be certain as to the cause of death until after the autopsy, one of the EMTs said. Autopsy? But I'm alive. It's only sleep paralysis. I found myself bundled onto a gurney, and my face was covered by a sheet, like I was a corpse. I overheard the EMTs talking. Who phoned it in? Dunno, must have been a neighbor. They leave a name? No, they just said they found him dead and wanted to report it. They hung up when they started asking questions. Somebody phoned it in? Phoned the authorities? Who? Who would do that? Who was in my house? The figure in black? The man without a face? You'd think it's foul play? Dunno. Guess they'll do an autopsy. That word again. But I was alive. And now I was scared shitless at the prospect of being dissected alive. I tried to reassure myself that I would wake up the moment the knife touched my skin. I would wake up, right? Right? And then something lowered the sheet that was covering my head. It was the dark figure crouched over in the cramped confines of the ambulance, fedora pulled low. Its face was only a white, featureless blur, but somehow I knew it was smiling. Was it keeping me from waking up? Eventually, we arrived at the hospital. I seemed to be having trouble keeping track of time. I may have really fallen asleep, but I awoke to the sound of rough voices. What do you got? Suspected heart attack. I'll take him. More being wheeled around. Damn shroud. Sheet. I couldn't see what was going on. I heard the opening of a metal drawer. Then I was being lifted. And then came the cold, breathtaking, bone-numbing, almost burning in its intensity. The cold of outer space. I was in a freezer drawer of the type used for cadavers, and if I wasn't released soon, I would actually freeze to death. I began to laugh, if only in my mind. Won't they be amazed when they cut me open? Cut me open to find I died of hypothermia? I must have gone dormant. Everything was black. Everything went black. I came to find myself bathed in light. Was it the rapture? Was I really dead? No. I was on an operating table, and a man in white, his face hidden by glasses and mask, making a faceless white blur, was approaching me with a small automatic saw. Behind him, in the corner, stood the dark figure. It too had no face, just a blur, but I knew it was smirking. I heard the whir of the saw. God! Incredible, burning, agonizing pain in my forehead. They were sawing open my skull. I finally screamed and woke up. I was back in my bedroom, and it was the middle of the night. What a nightmare. And then I noticed the dark figure with the fedora standing in the hallway, just outside my door. He was staring in at me, and I could now see his face. And it was my face. My face? What does it mean? It always begins the same way. I wake up in total darkness. I wonder briefly if I'm alive, and I wonder if I am alone. I am about to call out, "Who's there? Who's there?" But a restraining hand clutches my heart, and so I remain silent. And so I wait as my eyes slowly, ever so slowly, begin to grow accustomed to the dark. Gradually, I become aware of a faint light, a glow far off in the distance. And as my eyes slowly adjust, I come to understand that I am lying on the ground, on the floor of a vast corridor or tunnel. I can hear a faint pulsing sound, which makes me think of heavy machinery. Such are my surroundings. But how did I get here? Who am I? Who am I? Who? My name is Noel. Noel. Yeah, Noel. Noel Davidson. The last thing I remember is being in my bedroom, turning out the lights and going to bed. Am I asleep? Is this some kind of strange dream? Well, if it's a dream, then I'm bound to wake up, right? 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 But I don't. I don't wake up. Instead, the darkness gradually begins to lighten, while the rhythmic sound of the distant machinery begins increasing. So, after a time, which might be a minute, and which might be an hour, I rise unsteadily to my feet and begin to walk towards the light. And as I do, the corridor begins to narrow, and the light becomes more distinct. It's a brilliant, blinding, pure white light, and it flickers with a strobe effect in time to the pounding of the distant machinery. I walk towards it, drawn to the intense light. And then I wake up, and I'm back in my old, familiar, too warm bedroom, my heart palpitating, my body drenched in sweat, and terrified. Terrified. But of what? The first time it happened, I just put it down to a bad dream. But then, a few nights later, I woke up and found myself back in the corridor and closer to the light. I continued to walk towards the light, but slowly, with great hesitation, in intense fear of something connected to the light, something beyond the light. I would move until I came to a bend in the corridor, a corner, and there I would stop dead and cower in the gloom, and then wake up and be back in my room, still quaking in fear. This was more than a bad dream. In truth, the experience was so awful, I was afraid to go to sleep. And soon I was exhausted and on the verge of a nervous collapse. And so I ended up going to see Dr. Geiger. Perhaps he could tell me, am I really Noel Davidson? Or am I some unknown man dwelling in darkness and shadow? What was dream or nightmare? And what was reality? Dr. Geiger was an intense little man with a full head of shaggy hair and huge Coke bottle glasses. I didn't like him much, but he gave my story his rapt attention, then said, "You say you experience sheer terror?" "Yeah." "Of what?" "I don't really know. Something around the bend in the corridor. Something around the corner. Something that, What?" "I don't know. I don't know. I only know it terrifies me." "You know what you must do then. You must confront it. The next time you dream and you find yourself in the corridor, you must go around the corner. Go around the corner and confront whatever is there." I don't think I can. I don't think I can face it." "But you must. You must. Come, lie down here on this couch. I shall help you." I lay on the couch, and Geiger hypnotized me, first putting me through a relaxation exercise to put me in a receptive state of mind. "You will return to the corridor," the doctor's voice purred. "Return to the dark hallway and walk towards the light. Walk towards the pulsing light, to the bend in the corridor, the corner. And then you will turn the corner and confront whatever is there." And so I did. It always began the same way. I would wake up and find myself in a strange room in the dark. I would be lying in bed, drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in the drear and total silence. It was the silence which truly disturbed me. I could no longer hear the rhythmic sounds of the machinery. I'm not able to get back to sleep. And eventually the bedroom fills with light, and I rise and leave the room, and eventually leave the house in which the bedroom is situated. I move about the world, a stranger in a strange land, interacting with strangers who know me and called me by a name, Noel Davidson. Noel Davidson, a name which I didn't recognize. And all the time, I was in mortal terror of an enemy lurking somewhere in the background and working to destroy me. Working to destroy me, while I also wondered if I would ever return to my home, to the dark, to the sound of the machinery, to the distant pulsing light. And every night in this new world of horror, I would return to the bedroom, lie down on the bed, and for a short time return to my blessed home in the shadows and gloom. But always, always I returned to this world of horror and drew closer to my mortal enemy, until one day, after an eternity of agony, I met him. I met him face to face. He was an intense little man with a full head of shaggy hair and huge, huge Coke bottle glasses. An intense little man named Dr. Geiger. And he attempted to put me under hypnosis, no doubt, in order to destroy me. "You will return to the corridor," his voice purred. "Return to the dark hallway and walk towards the light. Walk towards the pulsing light, to the bend in the corridor, the corner, and then you will turn the corner. You will turn the corner and confront it. Confront whatever is there." And I did. But first, I arose from the couch, my mind in that strange, agonizing space, that twilight zone between consciousness and oblivion, terror and nirvana. Geiger stared up at me in surprise. "What is it you see?" I saw a blinding white light, as intense as the core of a nuclear blast furnace. And in the center of the light, the dark face of a man with shaggy hair and huge, huge Coke bottle glasses, and a thin, white neck, a thin, white throat. I reached out for that thin, white throat, and I grabbed it with my hard, rough hands, and I squeezed it and squeezed it to kill the thing that was trying to destroy me, which had planted its awful tendrils in my mind to control my thoughts, to control me. Control. And then it was dead. He was dead. I went and lay down on the couch and closed my eyes. And soon I was back to the corridor, back to the darkness, the pounding of the machinery, the pulsing of the lights. Back to the corridor, back home, forever. The murder of psychiatrist Stuart Geiger has been added to the myriad list of unsolved crimes. He was found strangled, while the patient he was with at the time, Noel Davidson, has, despite the best efforts of the authorities vanished into thin air. In fact, there is some question. Did Noel Davidson really exist at all? The moral of the story: sometimes in life, turning the corner isn't the best option. Moral of the story number 2: who says you can't go home again? If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the Black-Eyed Children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,021 subs in 2021. Till midnight. Cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix Here, that's PX Here, while the music was The Dreadful, The Dread, by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod.